Good morning and welcome to Geography 243, Remote Sensing 1, Winter 2020. This is just a short overview of week 4. We're in week 4 now in the term, our short 10-week terms that we have here at DePaul. Last week we had some material that we posted, and that included the 48-year history of Landsat going back to 1972, Landsats 1 through 5, 6 splashed, and then 7 and 8. So up through the present day. Landsat 8 is the current satellite that we're working on, but we do have access to all of the data in this program going back to 1972, every 18 to 16 days going back to 1972, imaging the entire Earth. So this is why it's so important for us and for everyone in the world, really, right now, because it's the best record of what's happening on Earth. It's available to civilians over the last nearly 50 years now. Also, we had a bit on histograms and how we look at images as data, how we work with the data, begin to work with the data in the images, how we extract, parts of that, as we're doing now in our activity 2. Activity 1 was graded, and you should have, if you turned one in, you should have an audio recording of feedback regarding your submission for that activity. That'll be typical, although not always will it be a personal. Sometimes I do more or less generalized audio feedback for the activities. And activity 2 is posted, and you guys have started on that, I'm sure, by now. And this is where we're working with the thermal data from Landsat 7, actually, I believe, before Landsat 7 went kind of on the fritz. Working with thermal data of the coast of northern Japan, Honshu, of the Fukushima area, and the two nuclear reactors that are on the coast there. So we're looking at the thermal plumes of those nuclear reactors before the earthquake from a few years ago, several years ago actually, that damaged these reactors and caused kind of a catastrophe that is still in progress. The catastrophe is still happening. The world ocean is being polluted by cesium and other heavy isotopes of the decay of reactor fuel. Excuse me. So that was last week, and this week there's a number of things we have going on. We do have here. Let's take a quick look at this, at what's been posted here. In week 4, we have 3 quick tours through 3 different gateways or portals for remote sensing data, and these are kind of building on what we know about Earth Explorer and then going out into a couple of other portals. And just briefly, Earth Explorer we're becoming familiar with. In this tour, we're going to look at using Earth Explorer. As you may have noticed, there's lots of different kinds of data there, mostly remote sensing data, remotely sensed data, so mostly image data. And we're going to take a look at data from the Sentinel satellite, the European Space Agency's more or less land remote sensing, their version of Landsat, relatively new project relative to Landsat. It hasn't been around for that long. And the European Space Agency is a big player in space, space exploration and using spacecraft for learning things about the Earth and for monitoring things that are going on the Earth, collecting data of that sort. And so there's a tour of that, and then there's a link back to Earth Explorer. And then there's also a quick tour of GLOVIS, the Global Visualization Interface, which is an alternative to Earth Explorer. It has some of the same data that Earth Explorer has, but somewhat different. Each of these, so there's a tour, a video tour of that, and then again a link to GlowViz. And there's also, and so, give that a watch. And then there's also a tour of another gateway. And this is a gateway. This is kind of an important gateway, as I've learned over the last 25 years or so. This is the Remote Pixel Gateway portal that's in Canada. It's a Canadian facility. It's at one of the universities in Canada. And this gives access mainly to Landsat, also to Sentinel. So it's kind of a backup, you might say. Why do we need a backup? Well, we need a backup because it seems that occasionally, and actually more frequently, over the last decade or so, the U.S. government shuts down. And when the U.S. government shuts down, they shut down the Eros Data Center in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And so, and most of the other, NASA and USGS offices in places like Greenbelt, Maryland, and Rockville, and on the Beltway around D.C. And so we lose access to our data, sometimes right in the middle of term, which can be catastrophic, near catastrophic for us. So we've done some different things to try to anticipate these kinds of things happening. Sometimes they happen, on fairly short notice. Sometimes not so. But this is something that I keep track of. And so if there is a shutdown, Remote Pixel is an option, or can be an option for us to use. So I give you three tours of these. Each of these is about 6 or 7 minutes long, and then there's a link to these. So you can take a look at these portals. There actually are dozens of portals just through the United States government, and there are more and more as we lead in releasing remote sensing data into the public domain. More and more other public agencies in other nations that do have space programs, and there are a growing number of space programs with remote sensing programs, including Japan, China, India, and so on. And I mean, actually, there are some of Central and Eastern European nations that have remote sensing satellites now that are being launched by private entities like SpaceX, has launched, and Middle Eastern nations that have remote sensing satellites now that are being launched by private entities or by other space agencies into very similar orbits, actually, to the kind of orbit that we have with Landsat. So this is something this is the world that we live in, and it's we have this growing community of technology and technologists who are doing this kind of work. And so, this is something that we need to stay apprised of. And next week, we have a number of things going on. We do have our first quiz, and that'll be on Friday of week 5, February 7th. I'll have more about that for you next week, on next Wednesday, when we release the week 5 module and that sort of stuff. But just wanted to give you a heads up, make sure that's on your calendar. I'll make sure it's on our calendar on our D2L page. And there's also some new content next week coming up on image rectification and georeferencing of images. This is what you do. What do you do when you have an image that's not georeferenced and you want to georeference it? It's kind of wonky and a little bit, slightly nerdy, but it is something that, and tedious, as many things are, I guess, in this world. And it gives you, a chance to see how that would be done if you do need to do that. And there are cases where, people, students and faculty and all kinds of people need to georeference things that are not georeferenced. So we'll take a look actually at a couple of other archives where there are ungeoreferenced imagery that you can you can work with, but you need to georeference it to use it the way that we use it in a GIS context. So, as I promised last week, I'm going to give you just a quick look at some photos. And again, this is this is just a as I say, a quick look at this. I actually have hundreds of photos. So this is where I parked my car. So this is where I got off the trail. Here I am starting out with my friend, and these are some of the first campsites that we had. So this was our first campsite. I like doing panoramas. So this is in Long Hammock on the Kissimmee River. Hammock is like a place of a little bit higher ground where you find some of these beautiful live oak trees. So this is where we camped the first night we were out. And so let's see, I'll show you a couple more of these. This quite often there are fires. So this is where there was a burn right by our camp. So we had a fire there. You can see these are palmettos, saw palmettos, I believe, that were burned down to the ground in that fire. And again, the live oak, just an amazing and beautiful tree. These actually were used because of their long curved branches. These were cultivated in the 18th and 19th centuries to build. They used these long curving branches to build ships in certain parts of the south of the southern United States. This is a southern tree, the live oak. So there's more and more of this stuff, and this is about what it was like. We got along the Kissimmee River, which is channelized largely, as you can see here. It's it's like a big straight channel, but it's actually one of the largest environmental restoration projects in the country right now, because they're restoring the original channel. So in parts of this, we were along they had this is a character building hike here, where you're hiking on this kind of road, this flat, like where's the scenery? Well, it's out there. And this is this is your prof, and this is part of the restored part. So this is the original channel of the Kissimmee that's being restored, and it's being opened back up, and they're actually getting rid of the channelized portion of the Kissimmee. The Kissimmee River runs from some of the big lakes up in central Florida down to, eventually down to Lake Okeechobee. So it goes into Lake Okeechobee. It's the main feeder for Lake Okeechobee. So this is like, part of the overflow of the Kissimmee River. And so you can see here, I don't know if you can see this, but there's actually this is like North American Vertical Datum. There's a symbol here. It's North American Vertical Datum 1984, which was the readjustment of the vertical datum. So these are elevations above sea level, and this is a place where the Kissimmee River, when the Kissimmee River floods, there's a gauge here that gauges it, and then you can see they have a little solar panel here that powers this, and it beams that data by microwave to a station that actually sends it up to a satellite. And this is pretty much how all of our flood gauges are organized now, and how we get data in near real time from flood gauge. Very important data, and very important use of that three-dimensional, the horizontal, the X and Y, and the vertical, the Z data, to collect data about flooding and so on. So it just goes on and on. This is what we did. We had a real foggy day. It was very very cold. Here's my tent. So this is the inexperienced camper's tent, and I actually had a picture of, this is how much food I had left for the last 2 days. And so you can see I had like 2 packages of dried noodles and some tea, 1 granola bar. So I did a pretty good job of packing food, because I was getting pretty hungry at this point. I had some dried milk and 1 pack of oatmeal left, and a little bit of water here. We did have a water pump we could get our water from. So this is what I was doing. I promised I was going to show you some pictures. So There you go. All right. So week 4, remote sensing, geography 243, winter 2020.